Welcome back to part 2 of rebuilding financially after divorce. So now I'd like to take a look at and help you understand the second part of your comeback plan financially, which in the first video we looked at the balance sheet and what a balance sheet was in terms of assets and liabilities, and defining what point A is, your new start point. So then you can determine your point B, which is where you'd like to be. So assets minus liabilities equals our start point, or our net worth position. Our start point is point A, and where we want to be in the future, 12 months, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years down the road, is our point B. So it's really important to understand what that looks like from a assets and liabilities perspective, because you can determine that. The second part of this video is to look at our income statement, some people call it, or others call it a profit and loss statement. So everybody has a profit and loss statement. Everyone does. Whether you understand it or not, it doesn't alter the fact you still have one. So today I want to talk to you a little bit about what it is, what it looks like, how to create one for yourself, and how important it is to know what yours looks like so you can then make progress financially. And in my situation, off the back of my marriage and business collapse, I was in a stressful situation where my income had stopped and my expenses were ongoing. Don't know if you've ever been in that position, but it's a scary place to be. So income on one side of the profit and loss statement, and then expenses on the other. So we all have one, and let's just go to the whiteboard and have a look at what it looks like. So here on the left hand side is your income, and on the right hand side we have expenses. Okay, so this is what's coming in and this is what's going out of your financial accounts. Now, in terms of debt reduction and to re-establish yourself financially after a setback, if you do have personal debt or business debt, then it's important to really understand that that's expensive. And particularly if there's two types of debt. There's what we call secured debt, and then there's unsecured debt. And I just want to talk to you about that for a minute, because coming from my banking background, how banks think in terms of debt is the higher the rate, the higher the risk to the bank. Okay, in other words, higher unsecured rates of debt, interest rates, like credit cards, for example, are a higher risk to the bank, because people basically, there's higher rates of default on unsecured loans than there are on, for example, secured loans, which are things like home loans, loans that are secured by assets. So a bank would typically take a mortgage over your property, your home, your land, or take some sort of mortgage over that. So at least that if the loan goes into default, then the bank has something to sell to get its money back, and hopefully if there's any left over, you get what's left over. So it's a much lower risk. Banks know that you will fight to keep your home more than you will fight to keep your credit card debt. If that makes sense. You'll fight to pay off your home loan more than you'll fight to pay off your credit card debt, because you're emotionally attached to your home, whereas when it comes to credit card debt, you probably in most cases don't know what those last 20 transactions on your credit card even bought you. So there's no emotional connection with credit card debt. So there's a high risk that if you're under financial stress, not you necessarily, but if people are under financial stress, then they'll default on paying off their credit card more than they'll default on paying off their home loan. So that's why the rates on credit cards are very high. Up in Australia right now, up around 20% interest, whereas home loans, because they're lower risk to the bank, home loans are more around, at the moment, cost of funding is quite cheap in Australia, so it's around 3%, 4%, somewhere in that range. So the cost to borrow for home lending is not as expensive as the cost to borrow for unsecured lending to the borrower. So it's important that when it comes to paying off debt, it makes sense to pay off the most expensive debts first, because they are what's bleeding you at a faster rate financially than your secured debts or your secured loans, such as home loans. So in my case, the first step I did was I took off, the first thing I did, I worked out my income, and my story is that because the business collapse happened, there was no income, and yet I had expenses over here, obviously personal expenses. We'll just, for today's exercise, we'll talk about personal expenses, and I'll touch on some of the business expenses as well. But my personal expenses were things like, obviously living expenses, and then I had, personal expenses, things like living utilities, which is like gas, water, electricity. These are things we like to spend money on because they provide a level of comfort. Then I had food, because it hurts when you're hungry. So you want to make sure you're eating food. Obviously insurances, protecting any assets you have, car insurance, property insurance if you have it. In my business collapse, I'd lost my home, so I didn't have any home insurance. But and then down here I had the dreaded credit cards, and I'll put those in capitals because we want to focus on those in a minute. Then, any personal loans you might have, right? And then your home loan. In terms of monthly repayments, right? So repayments on your credit cards, monthly repayments on your personal loans, monthly repayments on your home loans. And these are all, I like to look at them in terms of monthly expenses, because for me it's just it's an easier way for me to think like that. In business we conditioned to think monthly in terms of turnover and income and expenses. But you might decide to think in terms of weekly or fortnightly. It's up to you. It's not here nor there really, but it's important to understand that however you measure this, whether it be weekly, monthly or fortnightly, that you work out what it is for you in terms of income. So you look at your income and your expenses and you work out what those monthly numbers are. So, you put a number, you need to know what these are, what your gas amount is per month, what your water amount is per month, your electricity, how much it costs you to eat per month, your insurances. Most of your insurance policies are annual premiums. You can negotiate with your insurance providers to be monthly if you want to, take it direct debit or pay it monthly. Sometimes they be careful because they'll charge you a premium for that. So, but whatever your monthly insurance premiums work out to be for your car, your home, your house, other things that you insure, maybe an investment property if you have one. And then your monthly repayments on credit cards, right? Because your credit card bill is due each month. So if you look at insurances in terms of, if you look at your credit cards, that's a monthly repayment. But you want to make sure, and we'll touch on this in a minute, to make sure that your credit card payments, you want to pay off more than your minimum monthly repayment. Because if you do the numbers on credit cards, these are things that cost you in terms of interest around 20% in interest in Australia right now. I'm not sure what part of the world you're watching this, but you'll find that your credit card, because I said before, you're higher risk, they're higher rate, and they're unsecured credit is expensive. Personal loans in Australia right now, maybe in your country to be similar, around 12 to 15% interest per year they'll charge you on the balance. And then your home loans here right now, it's somewhere between 3 and 4% interest on the balance of your home loan. So obviously, because cards are higher risk, they're higher rate. Personal loans not quite as high. This might be car loans. Some of those can be secured. There might be quite a bit less in terms of interest because they're lower risk if they're secured. If they're unsecured personal loans, the rates will be quite high, so up around 15%. Of course, your home loans are secured by a mortgage, so they're lower risk to the bank. Therefore, they can afford to make a smaller margin on a larger amount, obviously, given that home loan balances are much higher than credit card or personal loan balances generally. So, what do you attack first? How do you work this out? So you need to come up with what these are monthly, right? Add them all up, go through everything. If you're not quite sure how many entries you need here, just go through your last 6 months of statements, bank statements, of where your cash flow is flowing in and out of, and just write down everything that is a payment, and then make a category for it, because obviously it's an ongoing recurring payment if it is in fact that. If it's a one-off, then you may not necessarily include that in your cash flow or your balance sheet, or your profit and loss statement. But regardless, what you're looking to do is come up with a bottom line number here. So your total expenses per month currently, right? And then over here on your income side this is your sources of income. So from your job, right? You have a job, how much do you make per month at your job? Or if you have a business, how much per month do you get to keep from your business? Net profit, right? Net profit. So, per month, and how much do you pay yourself out of your business? That's a revenue or an income or a dividend from that business. Other sources of incomes, you might have things like share dividends. You might own some shares in companies. You might be a shareholder in various different companies. So, share dividends, and work that out per month. Other sources of income. So I just put here other, right? So bottom line is you'll end up with a number per month, and that'll be the total income that you have access to for the month. Total income is a number, and then you have your total expenses as a number. Now, hopefully, what's coming in is more than what's going out. You would assume that'd be the case for most people, but you'd be surprised how many people actually have more going out than coming in. And if that's you, like it was for me for a while, you want to address that as soon as possible, because it's a surefire way of it ending in tears if you don't address that. In other words, if you've got to get to a place where you've got more coming in than going out. So either you're going to have to expand your income circle. If that's not the case, make more money, or reduce your expenses, or both, right? So that's what we call a P&L, profit and loss statement in business terms, or a cash flow budget in personal terms. So now, obviously, in terms of what to attack first, in terms of debt reduction, reducing your debt as fast as you can go. In my case, I had credit card debt, right? And it was expensive. And so if you're in a situation where you have a card balance of $5,000, say, at 20% interest on that card, that means for the year, 20% of $5,000 is $1,000. The bank will charge you to have that $5,000 credit card balance. It's very expensive. So you want to make sure that, given that's the most expensive debt, this is the one you want to pay off the quickest, because it's costing you the most. So in my case, and you'll have to work it out for yourself, but I went out and got a job after my business collapse. I ended up in banking, but before that, I just got any kind of job I could. When you've been through a business collapse, it takes a while to recover emotionally. So I just went out and drove trucks for a while. I worked for a racing stable, driving race horses to the races for a trainer. until I really worked out what I wanted to do the next stage of my life. And along another story, but I ended up in banking and had the last 10 years, 11 years in banking, which has been a real blessing. But for me, I had to work out the job income. My business income was non-existent anymore. I had some shares left over, so I had some shared income. And then, I worked out what it was that was coming in. And then I really needed then to work out how much of these I could, how many of these I could do away with and didn't need, right? So in my case, I went and lived in a borrowed house, right? It was on my parents' farm. It was an old rundown farm cottage that was small, 2-bedroom, no air conditioning, no insulation. It was pretty windy and breezy in the wintertime. But I was living there for a while because, it didn't cost me much to live there. I paid mum and dad something to live there, but it was vacant and it was a roof over my head, and I was prepared to do that in the short term, or until I got myself re-established financially. Not easy, but as a result of that, there was no gas out there on the farm, so I didn't have a gas bill. The water was from the dam, from the rain tank at the farm, and pumped it from the dam, and I had electricity. That was the only one I had. Now, you might not have access to a rundown second-hand house, but whatever you've got to do to try and reduce these expenses is my point, because at the end of the day, you want to make sure there's a buffer. So this side of the profit and loss needs to be greater than this side, right? This number here needs to be greater than this number to make progress, right? Because then we take that income and we take as much as we can and get rid of this debt here, this credit card. That's what I did. I attacked the most expensive debts first. I had 2 credit cards with $5,000 balances on each, and I did whatever I could to pay off $1,000 per month off one credit card. So I made minimum payments on one, and I did extra repayments on the other. And within 6 months, I had one paid off, and then within another 5 months, I had the other one paid off. So within under 12 months, I had both credit cards with a $5,000 balance on them paid off in full. I didn't use them for 12 months. I just paid cash wherever I could, and had them both paid out. And then the next one I attacked was my personal loans, because they were the next most expensive in terms of interest being charged by the bank. So paid out the interest paid out the personal loans, and the home loan that went with my divorce. The house went. So I had no home loan, but I had some business loans as well, business debts, residual debts left over from my business, like leases on shop fronts, and payouts to employees, and the various different residual debts I had from that business. But in the end, I was able to get on top and pay out those debts and get on top of my finances. And then from there, I was able to then really develop a solid savings plan and really get a start then to go to the next stage of rebuilding my life, which was to buy some income producing assets, like I was talking about on the previous video. So for you, really it's about sitting down and being diligent around what your income is, what your expenses are, and making sure that you know what that number looks like, right? That cash flow number. Are you in surplus or are you in deficit? If you're in deficit, that's okay. Well, it's not okay, but at least you know the number. If it's surplus, then at least you've got some wriggle room to move in terms of what to pay off first and still maintain some sort of standard of living. But whatever you've got to do to re-establish financially, it's so worth it, because you might have to, or you you will have to take a step back in the short term to sacrifice and do some things that are uncomfortable. Like you might have to work extra hours, you might have to get a job that you're not necessarily qualified to do, or you're overqualified to do, but at least it provides income that you can then attack those debts, attack those unsecured and secured debts as fast as you can go to get unsecured debt free, right? That's really what the name of the game is, to get back on track financially, because then once you pay off that first credit card, it's amazing the mental win that you have. It just helps you gain some much needed confidence to rebuild your life in other areas. So it's the little wins you're after, right? Little wins that you deserve, that you're looking for. Because, you know, if you're anything like me, I had my confidence knocked around a lot after my marriage and business collapse. You know, you lose a bit of confidence, lose a lot of confidence. And but I'm so glad that I bit the bullet and made a few sacrifices to get my financial life under control, by facing into it, knowing what the balance sheet looked like, knowing what the profit and loss looked like. And then, only then, could I have a plan to rebuild financially. And today, you know, I'm so thankful we own our own home again, remarried, family, in a position of strength financially, really, you know, investing in businesses and going ahead, you know, financially. But when you're first approaching your challenge of rebuilding, you know, that initial stage of putting the steps in place to pay off those debts and to get back on track, it can feel like it's going to take forever. But you just got to hang tough, hang in there, and you'll learn to look back and laugh one day. You will, I promise. But do whatever it takes to rebuild. Do whatever it takes to re-establish yourself, because it's so worth it down the road. I know you can do it, but the first step is in rebuilding your life financially, is to know where you're at from a balance sheet perspective and from a profit and loss perspective, and have a plan in place then to grow your balance sheet by really attacking your profit and loss and making sure that those expensive loans are paid off in the short term as a first step towards rebuilding in the long term. So if you're new to the channel and you like what you see, make sure you subscribe. Hit the notifications bell so every time I upload a new video, you'll be up to date with that. And also in the descriptions panel below, you'll notice I've got a link to my 10 bold steps. These are 10 bold steps that I took to help me fast track my comeback from my serious life setback over 10 years ago. They're yours today free just by clicking on that link. I will ask you for your email address. I'll be able then to email those out to you straight to your inbox. They're my 10 bold steps that I took to help me fast track my comeback from my setback. And I know if you apply those, they'll help you too. So thanks for joining me today. I hope this helps, and I know you can rebuild, but you need to know that it's intentional and it's worth it. And you know, it's not easy, but it's worth it. Until next time, I'll see you on the next video.